In this beginner-friendly course, you're going to learn how to use, in my opinion, the best robotic process automation tool on the market, Knime. I'm an IT consultant with over 10 years of experience specializing in data and RPA tools, so believe me when I say Knime is pretty awesome and it's free. Now let's look at what you'll learn in this course. We'll start with installing Knime and learning to navigate the interface, and then we'll jump straight into solving 3 real-world IT case studies with Knime whilst showing you how to use the program at the same time. So our first case study is automating a supermarket sales report. You're going to create this workflow that automatically calculates the profit for each supermarket item based on this accounting data, fill in the aisle name, aggregate the results into a pivot table, and create some pretty charts for middle management that like to look at colourful pictures. By solving this case study, you'll learn how to use Knime to read Excel files, remove duplicates, do an inner join to another table to fill in the aisle name, filter rows, round numbers, transform arithmetic, string, and conditional values in a column, create a pivot table, do basic visualization, and export to Excel. Our second case study is about splitting and joining a HR report about employee cost. This file is created by HR and it contains all employees in the company. HR have asked you to split this file for them by department so they can email it to each department head and ask them to forecast the salary cost of each of their employees. When the department heads have filled it in and emailed it back, HR want you to combine all the forecasts back together into one file. By doing this case study, you'll learn how to do the following in Knime: read Excel files, use a group by loop, use flow variables, and export to Excel. The last case study is finding Bitcoin arbitrage opportunities. Arbitrage is taking advantage of price differences of an asset. For example, Bitcoin might cost $25,000 on one exchange and $30,000 on another, therefore a price difference of $5,000. Arbitrage is buying Bitcoin on the cheaper exchange and transferring to and selling it on the expensive exchange. We'll be using Knime to look up 3 crypto exchanges to get the price of Bitcoin against the USD and identify if there's any arbitrage opportunities. Keep in mind, you won't make any money from doing this. You're like 10 years too late, where the price differences between exchanges used to be huge. This is really for educational purposes only, it's not financial advice, and don't be silly with your money. Anyway, by doing this case study, you'll learn how to do the following in Knime: use flow variables, create a GET API request, parse JSON to a table, filter columns, and transform string in a column. If you love the sound of all this, then let's jump into the next video where we'll learn how to install Knime and navigate the interface. I'll see you there. The first thing we're going to do is install Knime. So let's go to knime.org, click the download button here, and you don't need to fill in your details here at all. You can just click that you've accepted the terms and conditions and click download. Select the one for your operating system. I'm on Windows and I'll select the installer. And your download should automatically start. If it doesn't, then you can use the button up here to manually trigger it. At the time of recording this video, the latest version of Knime was 4.7.4, but there's a chance that by the time you watch this video, there'll be a newer version. I'm just gonna fast forward to completion. Great, once that's done, click on Open File. Once it's opened, click on I accept the agreement, install it in this directory, put it in the Start menu, leave all of this ticked, allocate this amount of memory, just leave that as default for Knime. Make sure you tick this. This is super important. Make installation folder writable for everyone. Otherwise, you won't be able to install like custom Knime nodes or modules. Make sure this is ticked. This will take a couple of minutes. I'm just going to fast forward to completion. Cool. Let's launch Knime Analytics Platform and click Finish. Now, the first time you launch Knime, it'll ask you to set a directory as your workspace or like your new root directory. I've put mine in C9, but you can leave it as the default, which is basically your username followed by Knime-workspace. I prefer to put mine there. And if you don't want to be prompted for this again every time you start up Knime, tick this option. Otherwise, feel free to leave it as that and click Launch. All right, that's Knime installed. Nice and easy. In the next video, we'll do a tour of the interface. Before we start, please download the Excel file that's attached to this lesson. We'll need it in a minute or two. So this is the Knime interface, and there's a fair bit going on here. So let me just start from the top left and work my way to the bottom right. So on the top left here, we have the Knime Explorer, and that's kind of like your Windows Explorer for Knime. It shows you all the projects and workflows that you've opened or created. And so what I want you to do is click on your local workspace, right click and select new Knime workflow. And let's call your workflow name like first project. Press enter and your first workflow is created called first project. And when you did that, you can see that this main window here changed, and this is called our workflow editor or canvas. I'm going to be using them interchangeably throughout this course, workflow editor and canvas. So this is the workflow editor for your current project. Some people like to have grid lines on their canvas, so you can go to workflow preferences here and select show grid lines. The canvas here is the main window, and it's where you see all your drag and drop tools and nodes for your workflow. The next window I want to show you is the node repository, and this is where you can select all your drag and drop tools or nodes. So if we click on IO and read, we can, for example, read an Excel file. So let's double click on that, and that'll import it to our canvas in the middle. We can do some data manipulation by going to manipulation, row, and applying a row filter. And if you leave the current node selected here, and you know it's selected because there's a border around it, and if you double click on a node, it will automatically join the two nodes together. And then after we've done some manipulation to our file, we want to export it to an Excel file again. So we can go to the write folder and select the Excel writer. Now, if you deselect the current node and then double click Excel writer, you can see that it didn't join onto the last node on the right here. So it means you'll have to manually move that node to the right and then join the two arrows together to complete the workflow. You can do either way, but I prefer to just have the last node selected and then double click on Excel writer. You can also drag the node into the canvas, but I think it's just easier to double click. So we'll be doing that for the rest of this course. Now in Knime, there's probably like hundreds of nodes to find, and it can be a bit hard to scroll through each and every single one to find the one that you want. So what you can do is use the search bar at the top here, and if we want something that reads a file, we can type read, and that'll give us all the nodes available with the word reader in it. If we want to do a filter, we can type filter, and that gives us all the nodes with the word filter in it. And to write stuff, we can try something like write, and that'll give us all the nodes with a write word in it. So that's basically the node repository. The next window I want to show you is Workflow Coach, and this one's really cool. What I want you to do is just click on this and enable node recommendations by the community, click update now, and then apply and close. And what this does is when you select one of the nodes in your workflow, the Workflow Coach considers all the workflows done in the Knime community and suggests to you the next popular node to use. And you can see that in the Knime community, 14% of all Knimers use group by, and then 9% use joiner. And you can see there that 5% use Excel writer for the next node after row filter, and that's what we've got there. So it's a pretty convenient window to have. I use it quite often. So that's the Workflow Coach. At the bottom, we've got outline, and this just shows a zoomed out view of your canvas. It's really good if you've got huge workflows and you just need to quickly navigate to each section of it. On the bottom right here, we've got the console, and this shows all the execution messages, like did your workflow run or did it fail? And then finally to the right, we have the description window, and this just gives you more details about the node that you've selected. I actually don't use this much, so I'm just going to close this and leave it closed for the rest of the course, but you can leave yours open. And Knime Hub we'll come back to after we complete the 3 case studies. I like to leave it closed because it just gives me more space in the canvas here. That covers it for the interface basics. So right now we have our nodes in the middle here, but nothing seems to be working. Our execution buttons at the top here are blanked out. The nodes are red, so we've got a traffic light system for each node, a red, yellow, green, and they're all red at the moment. And we're getting this warning saying that we don't have any input data. So that's probably why we can't execute anything and these buttons are blanked out, is because we don't have any input data. So let's fix that by opening the Excel Reader node by double clicking on it. And that's going to open the Excel Reader node window. And in here is where we can specify our input file and do some other configurations on our spreadsheet. Now you've got the option here to read from your local file system, which is, like your C drive. And if you go to browse, you can basically open any file inside your C drive. So if you downloaded the course file at the start of this video, you'll find that data.xlsx in the downloads folder. And if you check the preview window, you can see we've got 3 columns of data here: customer ID, customer name, and age. And if you want, you can press OK, and that's basically your file imported. You can press OK, and that's our data imported, and you can see that the node goes yellow, which means that it's ready for execution. But let's just say you wanted to export your workflow here and share it with your colleagues or your teammates. You can right-click on your workflow in the Knime Explorer and click Export Knime Workflow. And what it'll basically do is save everything inside a container file, which is this KNWF file, and it stores all the nodes you've used and all the input data. Now, we're not going to export it here, but let's just say if we did export it. If you exported your workflow and you chose your input file as your local file system, when your colleague goes to run the file and they don't have the data specifically inside this folder, the workflow is going to fail. So only use local file system if you're the only one that's going to use this file. If you're going to share it with others, then you should use the relative to. And when you do that, another drop-down box opens asking you to, don't worry about these two. It asks you whether or not you want to open your file relative to your current workflow. And your current workflow is basically the folder of where all these workflows and workflow groups are stored. So if we open up Windows Explorer, my workflow is inside C drive Knime. So if we were to put our data file in here under current workflow, you can see data XLSX, and the example workflow folder is there as well. So that's one way to do it. But the way that I prefer, if I'm sharing my workflow with other people, is to select current workflow data area. Now, if you select that, what Knime will do is actually create this data folder inside your first project folder, and you can paste your Excel file in there. So if we now go to browse, you can see that the root directory is now going to start inside this data folder. And just to prove that this is the correct data file, let's rename it to data2, browse again, and there's our file. Now it's up to you whether or not you want to use local file system or relative to. For this example, I'll use relative to, but I'm most likely going to be using them interchangeably. So I'll just leave this as relative to current workflow data area for now. The next thing I want to show you in this configuration window is the transformation tab. I think this is pretty helpful. If you need to quickly change the name of the columns, you can add a new name inside here, but we're just going to leave it as the default here. And you can also change the data type if you need to. There's a bunch of other configurations and tinkerings that you can do with your spreadsheet. I'll leave it up to you to explore it. I don't use most of these because my spreadsheets aren't that complicated. So feel free to poke around. So we'll press OK. And again, our node is yellow, which means it's ready for execution. So you can see that our execution buttons here are now highlighted, and we can either press F7 or this button to select the executed node, or we can press Shift F7 or this button here to execute all nodes. Now, if we run all nodes, this one will probably run successfully because it's ready, but we'll probably get errors and warnings for these two because they're not ready yet. So let's just run that. And you can see that, yep, this is successful because it's now green, but a new message appeared in the console saying that we've got a warning for our row filter because there's no filter specified. So let's go and configure our row filter. So if we start from the top, we can choose a column that we want to filter by. So let's select age, and let's say we want to filter by customers that are aged 50 and over. So we'll click apply, okay. Our node is yellow, which means it's ready for execution, but you can see we got another warning at the bottom here to please specify a file for the Excel writer. So let's open that up and select the folder of where we want to store our file. Again, I'm going to use relative to the workflow data area, and I'm going to call my new file filtered data. If you want, you can rename your spreadsheet when it's outputted. I'm just going to leave it as default _1, and I'll press OK. And that's great. Both nodes are now yellow and ready for execution. Now, every time you select the last node in your workflow, and if you just press the play button, it'll execute all the nodes before the last node. So, by clicking this and that, you basically run all nodes. That just sort of saves you from having to press this button, I guess, if you've got this node selected here or here. You can just select the last one and press run. Awesome, it looked like everything worked. And if you want to manually validate that, what you can do is right click each node, and the last option here is the output of each node. So this opens a view on output 1. So when we ran our node, it outputted this table of data for us, which is consistent with the preview of our Excel file there. If we right click and open our filter, you can see that's done that correctly because it's filtered for people over the age of 50. So we've got Casey, that's correct. And there's nothing to show because for this one, we're just outputting a file. So if we open up Knime and yep, we're in our data area and we can see that filtered data has been created. When we open it up, it's exported Casey, which is the only customer that's 50 years or older. And that's how you create a workflow in Knime. The basic structure is always going to be input, process, and output. As long as you remember that structure, you'll be able to create any Knime workflow you want. All right, that's basically it for the interface. There's actually heaps of interface features that I want to show you, like this Knime hub, but they're not exactly relevant for now. We'll go through them after we finish our 3 case studies, which are coming up in the next few videos.